I have the pleasant experience of almost the last hour of the day, and I decided that I would give you the biggest and longest and most packed presentation I possibly could. So I hope I wake everybody up so everybody goes home and is ready for tomorrow. I have a lot of stuff to go through, but actually the key point that you're going to take away today is that it could be that the purpose of my life is to only serve as a warning to others. Today I actually have 4 presentations I'm going to go through. There are 4 different stories, and I hope you enjoy those stories. And they all kind of fit together, so I hope you enjoy each one of those stories. The first story I'm going to tell you about is actually, this is my story. Now, I'm in my 40s, so I have a long story. But I can tell you a little bit of the story. Where it starts is actually my parents, where I was born. I started my life on a farm. My father was a philosopher. You can see a picture of him up here. He had the Marxist beard and the lumbersexual look about him. And he was a philosopher. Actually, he was a philosopher that started dairy farming because he believed that the corporations of the world were evil and that, in fact, we should go back to grassroots. But unfortunately, due to the Canadian recession in the 80s, we actually went bankrupt, the family. And so we moved to the Angolan Civil War. Makes sense? So then I spent the rest of my childhood in the Angolan Civil War, learning and doing things there, and moved around. My father did what was called deep rural capacity building. I was going out into the middle of absolutely nowhere and helping people drill wells and do all sorts of crazy things. And I would follow them around. And it's interesting because, I'll talk about this later, but I was, for hundreds of thousands of people, the first white child that they'd ever seen. Because I'd go out in the middle of the depths of Africa, and people would come over and touch me and look at me. And I'm probably the only developer that you've ever seen or met that feels weird if people aren't staring at him all the time. That's why. And in fact, my parents dragged me around the world. I was in 60 countries before I was 12. So I was all over the place all the time. I'm not going to go through all the stories of that, but there were a lot. There's another interesting story, though, and that is that my parents worked for a while for World Vision. And World Vision believed that, and I was reminded, I was at the Tom Cochrane opening this week for Life is a Highway. Do you remember that song? So Tom Cochrane was going around with World Vision at the same place that I was at the same time. But World Vision arranged for me to get a computer in the depths of Africa. I was probably the only kid in the world who had a monkey and a computer at that time in history. What's interesting, though, is that then I decided not to go into computers and stuff, but I went to Bible school, then I tried my hand at medical school, then I decided I wanted to change the world. I wanted to do something big. So I decided to go to journalism school and see if I could tell everybody about how the world was changing and what was happening. And then I realized what journalism really was, and so I decided to become a politician. Dressed like this. And then I realized what politics really was. I didn't want to do that either. That whole time I was environmentally minded. I was involved in tree planting. I was a tree planter for 7 years and did all sorts of crazy things. During that period, during school, I took all sorts of courses on programming. And actually that was the beginning of the internet. The internet had just started, and I found it so exciting, and I wanted to be part of that. But then I decided to do something else and became a professional musician. I made multiple records, and actually 4 of those records you see up here, you can get at least one still on iTunes, made it to the top 10 on college stations. Very proud of that. But in fact, I found that there was no money in music. But I felt that by being a musician, I could teach the whole world, or tell the world about all the things that were changing, all these cool things. But it didn't really work, because I was broke all the time. So in order to sort of survive, what I did is I actually became people's computer guy. And I actually started working for a computer company and doing computer things. And then that's when I was like, the internet, this thing is going to change everything. I have to get involved in this. And so my grandmother had an art gallery, and I said, I'm going to take your art gallery and I'm going to put it online. That's what I did. I got a grant from the government, and I started what may be the world's first art gallery. There was lots of people coming up with ideas at that time. I took thousands of artists' paintings, took pictures of them, and put them on the internet. I will tell you, this is the stupidest idea in history. I never sold a painting. I spent years of my life trying to make it work. It didn't. But what did happen is I bumped into a guy who had an agency. The agency was called Tree Frog. There was a digital marketing agency. They made websites, and at that point they did CD-ROMs and Flash stuff, which is sort of a dead idea. And so there was 3 of us sitting around, a designer, myself, and a sort of sales company guy. And everyone said, okay, what are we going to do? And the designer said, well, I'm going to design. And the other guy, the company guy said, I'm going to do sales. And the third person, which is me, I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, well, somebody needs to program. And I was like, well, who's going to do that? He's like, well, you're going to do that. And so I ended up sort of inheriting the job of developer somehow. And I started, there was actually this moment where there was 2 CDs that had come in the mail, because back then you got CDs in the mail, and one was really pretty from a company called Lasso, and the other one was not so pretty from a company called Tango, and we decided to go with the pretty CD. So that's how I became a Lasso developer. So before I switch stories, I did want to just make sure you caught all these points, that one, I am in fact a developer, although I have CEO as a title now. I do love being the center of attention for the excuses that I gave earlier. And I am indeed ambitious, but it's not just ambition to take everyone's money and run away with it. It's actually ambition because I truly believe, through this sort of life that I've had, that I can help make the world a better place. And what's interesting is that I also believe, because of the internet, that the internet is making life better. I mean, I grew up in Africa. I see how the rest of the world works. And when I have to go into not having the internet for about 5 minutes, I start to freak out. Now, let me quickly tell you the story of Tree Frog. The story of Tree Frog today is that now we're pushing 40 people. It's up in Newmarket. If you're up in Newmarket and you're right beside the hospital, you'll see Tree Frog. Sorry?
It's a parking lot.
Yes, exactly, yes. Well, I'm beside the parking lot. We were beside the parking lot. So this is a crazy group of people. Like, we have the craziest bunch. And it's got a really nice space you can come in, you can take a look at. We've got these really cool rooms. We've got whiteboards everywhere that you can write your ideas down. We've got standing desks, the classic cool stuff of an agency. We run conferences. We run poetry readings and theater stuff. We've got like Lego stuff that happens. We've got a Lego room that people can play in all day. Let me just go quickly through this. We've got a recording studio if you want to make some music. We've got beer taps in case you want to make some music. We've got a sleep room in case you get a little snoozy. They've got an electric car, so if during the day you need to go grab some lunch, you can jump in the car and go ride in it. But the fact is, all of this stuff, for those of you who are looking for work, or for those of you who are going, the reality is, that's all just fluff. Honestly, it's fluff. I'll tell you, though, that I do believe in the idea of innovation. And although everyone in here, because you're in an innovative environment, we're all thinking about innovation as a technical thing. I actually believe innovation is more than just technical. Innovation is actually about business. It's about the way we work. It's about the way we think. Innovation isn't just about technology. I do have a belief, and in fact I did a TED Talk on this. If you want to get more of these ideas, you can go check me out on TED. This concept that there were these great ideas. There are these things that became frameworks. Those frameworks became rules. Those rules we start to see as truth, and that they're not necessarily true. In fact, many of the frameworks that we use today for everyday life, and even in technology, somebody said in the last talk that I was at, the standards that we have on the desktop suck. And the reality is it's true in many cases, because there were frameworks that somebody came up with and nobody bothered to challenge them, so we just kept on using them. But there's a couple of big lies that I want to challenge. One of the big lies is that businesses exclusively exist for profit. And the idea is that this came out of a 100-year-old idea that you start with a product or service, and around that product or service you build operations to make the product or service happen. And around that, you build a sales team to go sell that stuff. And then around that, you try and sell that as many times as you can execute it. And the more times you do that, the more money you make, and you win the game, right? But in fact, the goal of all of these companies is profit. That's not necessarily a good thing. So in fact, with Tree Frog, we've said, look, let's have a completely different philosophy. Let's start with the idea that we want to help people be successful, that we want to change the way the world works. We want to make it better in all different ways. Around that, we're going to find a bunch of people that love doing that with us. Around that, we're going to go find clients that like to do that with us. And around that, we're going to try and figure out what activities we're going to do that will help them be successful. And what's interesting is we still have to have profit. What I mean by profit is really just free cash flow. If you spend more money than you make, you die. Profit is like breathing. You have to have it. It just shouldn't be the focus of why you exist. On top of that, we also believe that the people that we work with should be successful. They should be happy. They should enjoy what they do. And our clients should be successful. We shouldn't just be selling schlock. We should actually do things that meaningfully help people. We also think that whatever we're doing should genuinely not damage or promote or be good for the environment. So we try and have carbon neutral attitude. And also, we have to think about our community. And when I mean my community, or our community, I mean our local community, and I also mean our international community. This is a huge philosophical leap from the exclusive focus on profit. What's also interesting about this is that no one stakeholder can win. You can't damage the environment for profit's sake. We all know that. But you also can't damage your team for profit's sake. And you shouldn't be damaging your community for your team's sake. So having all of these things in alignment is really a meaningful idea. As well, I believe there's some other big lies out there. Another example would be work-life balance is key. So the idea that we all started with is a 100-year-old idea again, that you should work 8 hours, play 8 hours, and sleep 8 hours. And this actually came out because kids were being forced to work 17 hours a day, and somebody said, that's probably inappropriate. Let's only make them work 12 hours. And eventually they came back to this system. It was a fairly fair system. But then what they do is they say, look, what we're going to do is we're going to make you work in the middle of the day, because that's the best and most productive part of the day. So we're going to break up your play to be on both sides. And then, of course, we didn't get into this, which is how houses and stuff. You have to commute to work, and you have to do it on it's playtime, because we love to commute, right? So you're going to live, where I live in Newmarket, the average commute is 1 hour and 10 minutes, both ways. That's 2 hours and 20 minutes average commute. That is insanity, I'm sorry. So, but that's what you do during your playtime, and of course now you have to get your kids ready for school and get lunches made and do all that other stuff. So play actually gets compressed and it disappears. And in fact, the big idea around this is that work is hard and miserable, and you get paid for the day to suck. That's what the money's for. This is a broken idea. Would we all agree? That there has to be something better. And the fact is, with this 8-hour day, 9 to 5 thing, many companies have fixed this already. Like help move close, be closer. That's a simple thing you can do. Go shopping on a Tuesday, not at 5 o'clock when everybody else is shopping. I mean, just be more efficient. As a group of programmers and developers probably in this room, you already know this. Just find other ways to be efficient and run multiple things at the same time. Programmers are going to change the world, if they haven't already. There's another big lie, which I believe, which is retirement is the key. So everybody in this room, like people, the idea of retirement, for those of you who've already retired, I think is a ridiculous idea. It's an idea that was born sort of out of the 50s and 40s, where you take all of that work from their whole life because you didn't have any play left, and you'd do it after 65, which is, to me, a broken idea. Especially because most of the people in this room are going to live longer than their parents did on average. And some of the people in this room are going to live to be 150 years old. That's a reality. And if that's a reality that we're going to live that long, why would we want to go play golf for 75 years or 85 years after? It's kind of ridiculous. And what's interesting is I had this realization. My grandfather was 86 years old, still working full time. And I was 36, and I went, I have 50 years left. So if I have 50 years of work left, why would I be creating a company that's going to last 3 to 5 years, exit, get rich, and go do something else? This is another broken idea, that we're trying to get rich quick. And we're not thinking about companies and thinking about big ideas and how to make the world change in a bigger way. So my grandfather worked till he was 86, that was 50 years, and I went, you know, if we're going to talk about 50 years, I could potentially last a lot longer. Why don't we start thinking about building companies that last 1,000 years? So my goal is to turn TreeFrog, which is only 40 people, into a company that can last 40 years. That's hard. And what we do is we've said, look, I know I'm not going to be alive in 1,000 years, maybe, but probably unlikely. Probably uploaded myself to the internet if I last that long. But the reality is it's the way we do things that lasts 1,000 years. And so part of it is how do we do things, and getting everybody to agree on, let's do these things, let's have standards, but the standards shouldn't just be how the math works and the network protocols. It should also be how we treat each other, and how we are collaborative and innovative and enthusiastic in our day-to-day life. So the idea really behind this is a company that I want to work at. And I know I'm going to be there for 100 years, so I want to build a company of people that I love to be around. And it's not about throwing everything out. It's about rethinking everything. There's a few more things that are very relevant for later on in the presentation before I move on. One is you'll notice I'm wearing a suit. Nobody else is, right? I'm the only guy in the room wearing a suit. And it's funny because what happened is I'm a quarter Hawaiian. I used to wear Hawaiian shirts all the time. That's all I wore. And I was so proud, pajama pants, Hawaiian shirt, that was me. I was a developer starting TreeFrog. And I was so proud that I did not have to wear, the monkey suit because that was ridiculous, that I got to wear whatever I wanted to. And then I hired someone who came to work at TreeFrog, and they looked at me and they said, this company is never going to go anywhere unless you start dressing for the job that you want, not the job that you have. I said, okay, that's a good theory. I'll take you up on that. So we went out and we got a nice shirt and a nice pair of pants, and I went back, and the very next day I had a meeting, and I signed a deal that I would never have had the capacity to do. And within about 3 months, I was wearing suits all the time, and it literally changed my life. I mean, it literally it was like a key. I could walk in any door. I've got a suit on. I can go anywhere. It's amazing. It's like a suit of armor meets pajamas. And in fact, now my suits are made by the same guy who makes the suits for the show suits. And I got to tell you, this is the most comfortable suit. This is like wearing pajamas. I highly recommend, well, if you take one thing away from this, you have to get a custom-made suit before you die. The other thing is you may notice I have green hair, right? Now what's interesting about the green hair is this started on, because I was a musician, right? So it was vestigial in a way. And I decided I'd put a little bit of color in my hair just to be crazy. And everybody started knowing me as the crazy-haired guy. And as you've noticed, it's now jumped to the shark. But in fact, I have all of these benefits by having green hair. I can walk into a room of people like this, and everyone will remember the ridiculous-looking guy with the green hair. I'm like one step from a squishy nose, right? And some big red shoes. So it's been a huge asset to me as the business has grown to wear a suit, have green hair. And the last but not least is I call myself a CEO. Now, a CEO of a company of 2 people is kind of a ridiculous title. Right? It's like calling myself Grand Poobah of the universe. But where's the math? Like if you have a company of 2 people, are you not a CEO? What about a company of 1,000 people? Are you a CEO now? Like how do you know when you're a CEO and when you're just a regular guy? And in fact, what happened was I just called myself senior developer. We were 10 people. I had senior developer on my business card, and I was giving that out, and people were like, "No, I want to talk to the boss." I'm like, "No, I am the boss. No, I want to talk to the boss." Now I have CEO on my card, and it's like a key. It gets me into doors. I can pick up a phone and say, "Hey, I'm the CEO of this 2-person company," but I just say I'm the CEO, and I get there. So I'm just saying that's why. I have another story for you. This is a quick skip. The story of Lasso. So, Lasso. I'm actually going to start with another story, which is the story of Apple. I know everyone has to put Apple in their presentation, but this time it actually really is really contextual. So, you guys may remember, so right about when I was born, Apple began. And after a while, it was starting to do really well, so they decided they were going to go hire a CEO, which is a CEO of, I think it was Pepsi-Cola or Coke. I can't remember which one. Pepsi was Pepsi, thank you. So I was the CEO of Pepsi. So, and then they came out with the Mac. You guys have all seen, so many of you have seen, at least one of you has seen the book or read the movie. But you'll remember that at one point Jobs got pissed off and left, right? So he left, and then they continued moving forward. Another company started called FileMaker. Anybody heard of FileMaker? A couple of you, there you go. So continuing the story on, and John Sculley decided he was going to split the company into 2 parts. He was going to have a hardware company called Apple Computers and a software company called Claris. Does anybody remember Claris? Wow, that dates you all if you do, I'm sorry. But Claris decided they wanted to compete against a Microsoft Office, at least that's what I think. So they started buying up all of these different softwares to try and compete. One of the software pieces they bought was a company called FileMaker. That was sort of the access of the Claris group. So fast forward a little bit, and all sorts of crazy things happened. One is the internet started to come out, and a company realized that they could actually connect FileMaker with the internet, and you could have these dynamic websites that did stuff. It was insane back then, obviously. And fast forward a little bit, and Apple realized, hey, this company that's figured this out, this is genius. We should put this as part of Claris. So they licensed the whole thing, and they stuck it into what is now called, which was Claris, was called Claris Dynamic Markup Language, CDML. Fast forward a little bit more, and the unthinkable happened. Jobs decided he would come back, and he killed Claris. Out of 90 products, if you've read the book, they went down to 10. One of the products that got the boot was this programming language called Lasso. It got lost. But of course, it was a closed source language, right? So all of the people using it were like, what about our stuff? What are we going to do? So the company said, hey, let's continue. We're going to build this. We're going to make this huge company out of this language called Lasso. Now, I'm not going to get into the entire history because you guys, many of you in this room probably know the history better than I do. But if we look, like in 100 years, when people look back, they're going to be like, there was this one moment, which is actually a few years, where all of these languages came out, all of these ideas, all of these cool things. We had Ruby, which later became Rails, and PHP, and Java, and everything started to build web stuff because it just kind of exploded. It was this insane explosion of ideas. And in fact, if you look at it from a different angle, I like to joke about this back in those days. I have friends, I call them sort of cultures, and you guys can probably correct me on all this, but I have some friends who went to the guidance counselor and said, what should I do with the rest of my life? And the guidance counselor was like, well, you're smart. You should go into computers. There's big money there, right? But not having ever used a computer before, they were like, you should go into Microsoft because that's what computers is. And they got sucked into Microsoft culture. And these other people that were like hacking in their basement with stuff and making things work, and they sort of got into the Linuxy or hacking culture, you might want to call it. Anyway, you've got this LAMP stack, and you've got these standards within this LAMP stack. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into this because we're going to talk about it next door. But the idea is that, of course, we had, instead of building every last little thing all by yourself every single time in machine language, that seemed ridiculous, all of these frameworks sprung up around this so you could build on top of things so that you could create web servers so you could send information. And one of the things that Lasso had and did had some special sauce which other languages didn't do. For example, just-in-time compilation. I could go through. There's all sorts of stuff that Lasso did, which was really neat. It had, where should I go? I could talk about literally Lasso for hours about how neat it was. We had a really compelling threading model. We had Unicode support before everybody else did. We had all sorts of different things. And one of the biggest things, of course, that Lasso had, as well as the technology, there were some security realities behind it. But even more so was it had an amazing community. And it was a community of guys who learned how to develop stuff in the 90s and just kept building and kind of went all insular and disappeared into the basements of their houses and kept building stuff. And are still building stuff today in Lasso. And this whole group, though, is all fundamentally based around a closed source language. And in fact, today, there are still hundreds of universities and all sorts of crazy things. The stories of where Lasso ended up as this language that sort of grew is astonishing. And yet, probably no one in this room has heard of it. Anyone heard of Lasso? One! That's good. That's statistically appropriate. Especially since he's one of the primary Lasso developers. But anyway. Right. Now, Lasso had some really neat stuff in that it was so simplistic to use. It sort of had that Apple DNA, we like to think about it, where I could literally just type the word date wrapped with some brackets, and it would spit out the date, and I could easily manipulate it. And I could use it in an embedded way or a scripted way. And so it sort of made it really easy to use. But it was a closed source language. This, if I remember correctly, what is the theme of this conference?
Is it open source?
Resistance is futile.
Was futile, exactly. Resistance was futile. This is not an open source language. And one of the problems with that is if you looked at the user base, if you looked at the revenue it was generating, because it was still selling server by server, like in the most old-fashioned way possible, the revenue was going down and down and down and down. Now TreeFrog, this really interesting philosophical company, was using Lasso for everything it did. In fact, still does use Lasso for much of the stuff we do. And we saw the fact that this language was about to die. And we were right after the recession and went, we got to do something about this. So we said we should open source this language. This would be, we got to grab this language, something has to happen with it so that it doesn't disappear. You guys can all, now that you look backwards in history, you can imagine the fear of a company that's based on a product that's going to disappear and all your stuff is built in it. That makes you panic. That is a reason why open source is amazing. But if you look at the history of this a closed source language, it was with Apple, but it got bought by an agency. Then it got bought by another agency, which turned into another agency, which got bought by another agency. I mean, it's sordid history. It's like a soap opera of purchasing and the intellectual property moving around. And so, in fact, what we did ultimately is we managed to convince them, and we took on the debt, and we actually bought the company ourselves and brought all the people up to Canada. So that whole thing moved here, which is really neat. And to get it rolling again, we did all sorts of crazy things. We ran conferences. We came up with new software. We came up with an Eclipse version called Lasso Lab. We did all sorts of things to get the language. And actually, it started to roll once again. So this amazing technology that had spent 20 years in development, which did all these neat things, but was still closed source. But there's a problem here. So one of the problems is that, in fact, the Canadian Department of Defense uses this. So does the American Department of Defense. Battleships use it. The UN uses it. All of these companies used it. And I was talking with one of the most well-known developers in our community, who's one of the senior security architects at PayPal. And I said, look, let's talk about open source. And he said, open source, it's fundamentally more secure, I said, because it's closed source. And if we open source it, we're just going to kind of make it unsecure now. And he said, no, that's not the theory. The theory is the theory of the glass lock, which is something that is open source, everyone could look at and tell you how to improve it. Presuming everybody is a good person. That's another discussion. But the problem is that this wasn't designed from scratch to be open source. This is a product that had just had a bunch of developers over 20 years shoveling stuff in. So there were great, beautiful parts of it, and there was unbelievably ugly stuff in it. And somewhere in that ugly stuff was security vulnerabilities that would literally directly and quickly affect national security had we just open sourced it randomly. So now we're screwed. Now we have this amazing product with these amazing ideas that have come out of these genius developers over a period of time, and we can't do anything with it. Then something happened. Fast forward a little bit back to our Apple thing, and a new language came out called Swift. Has anyone heard of Swift? Now we've got some people that have heard of Swift. That's good. So Swift came out. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's a programming language for iOS development. You used to only be able to use Objective-C. Now you can use a new language called Swift. And when we first looked at it, it looked so much like Lasso. We kind of scratched our head and went, wow. Well, it came out of the same sort of set of ideals, the same sort of Apple sort of notions. And we said, and actually our lead developer, Kyle Jessup, he said, if I was to rewrite Lasso again and not have to worry about it, I would write Swift. And something else then happened in 2015. Now we have two closed source languages. Lasso, which is a server-side language, and Swift, which is a mobile language, really iOS. Swift open sources. Now I can remember this point where I was like, we're dead. Like someone's going to go build a server-side variant of Swift, and the Lasso developers would be like, well, nice knowing you after 20 years, bye-bye, and I'll leave and go to the Swift world. And so I was out drinking beer commiserating with the lead developer of Lasso, the father of Lasso, who started it in 1994. And we said, why don't we be that? Why don't we take all of the cool ideas out of Lasso and rebuild them in Swift? And now we've taken all the ideas, we open source, we've created a path for all of our development community and everything. And we don't have to screw national security. We actually move all those ideas into a new place. And so I said, why not? Let's take those two ideas, let's squish them together, and let's turn it into a new product. And this now becomes a new story, my next presentation on the story of Perfect. How am I doing for time? So let's talk about this for a second. So I remember looking out on the internet because we were worried about this, and will Swift ever be open source? Will there ever be a back end for Swift? And people were basically saying, no. Whoever wrote this article, when can I code on the Swift on the server? And his answer was probably never. Was very wrong. Fast forward a little bit, and tons of people were talking about this idea that this would make an amazing back-end language. It would make because of the way it's written and how performant it is. And so the reality is that we have this, especially in the mobile space, all of these different frameworks that have sprung up over time, server-side frameworks and now client-side framework or languages. And so there's a lot of, as you guys all know, if you're a developer, you've got to learn multiple things and learn how to interact, and you don't get that nice isomorphism. You do in JavaScript and some other stuff at a higher level, but you don't get it at a native level. So we said, look, there's all sorts of cool ideas. Enter Swift. It's got all of these cool, it's easy to read, it's beautiful to work with, people love it. It's all got all of the right things. So there's also another thing which I'm going to point out, that the number of jobs in this, because of iOS and app development, is going crazy. If you want a job, you need to learn Swift. Swift developers are like unicorns right now. Like, people are desperate for Swift developers. It's great because everyone wants to build apps with them. Let's build an app, and that's the only way to do it. It's anchored there, really. And people who do use it, if you look at Stack Overflow, if you look at other places, people love this language. They like working with it. It's natural. It feels natural. It's almost like pseudocode. So we released, after 5 months of work, basically Lasso 10, which was perfect. We called it perfect. We thought it was the perfect idea. And it basically was the ability to write Swift code on the server. And immediately, it started trending on GitHub. And for a week, we were the top project on GitHub, which I'd never been on GitHub before. First project on GitHub. That's very fun. And more than that is, like, the world went crazy. I mean, 24 hours later, we were on the front page of Wired magazine. Like, every magazine we were on the front page of. We had all this visibility. We had, like, Twitter followers just, like, coming, like, in the hundreds every day. We had, what else do we have? I mean, it was crazy. It was very exciting and very fun and crazy. In fact, my favorite part was we were actually at Times Square in London, like on the big billboards. So there's like Lindsay Lohan on one board and us on the other board. That was cool. That was fun. And basically, it's not anything complex. There's the basic library of stuff that you need to do server-side code. There's the basic plugin, so it can do server. So you can either attach it to the LAMP stack and attach it as an Apache plugin, or run it as a standalone server, and any data source connector you need, everything from MySQL to Hadoop. Now, the benefit is because of Swift's performance. I mean, it's way faster than Ruby, obviously, but then Node and even Java it can take on in some cases, and in some cases much faster than Java. And so if you look at Perfect, in terms of its raw performance, third parties have now looked at it and said, wow, the performance of this, because of all these benefits, is astonishing. It's great. So you now have a framework that can do things. And in fact, it's so good that it uses 12% less resources resting and 94 times less resources while it's going. So the math on this is if you have a $2,000 a month Amazon cloud, you can pay $90 for the same result. Or continue to spend $2,000 and have more containers running, which leads to more fault tolerance and more IOs and all sorts of other benefits. So it's also Perfect up against all the other frameworks that have come out, has this incredible, I mean, we've basically won in every category in terms of memory usage and speed, all sorts of things. And the popularity has rocketed up so high that, in fact, we crossed Scala, I don't know how to pronounce that. I've only ever seen it written. Does somebody know how to pronounce Scala? Scala? You see Scala? OK. And then we're going to add, in the next few months, we'll cross Ruby, which is insane. We've only been around for, we haven't even been around a year yet. This is super crazy exciting. There's more exciting stuff than this. One exciting thing is we met a developer who used to be the lead developer of LucasArts. Like, Luke, I'm your father, LucasArts. Yes, that guy. Who also happens to be his last name is Lassonde. You may have heard of the Lassonde School of Engineering. And he went, this is genius. And he gave us $1.5 million, basically. Well, $1.2 million, and then some other people threw in some more money so that we could go hire people so we could go make this framework the coolest framework in history. So after all of those cool things, wasn't that exciting? Today I stand here and I feel like a complete failure. And so now I'm going to discuss that. obviously, we haven't completely failed, and this is an ongoing story, but today at an open source conference, I'm like, we have great technology, and we totally failed the open source part. And here's why. So I would actually, this is my favorite quote. Another one of the guys in the Swift world, he said, the biggest problem with Perfect is that, in my opinion, you guys are staining Swift's reputation. And in fact, another way of looking at it is basically the Swift elite. So Swift has been around for 1.5 years, 2 years. They hate us. They hate us. Like, we're not invited to the party. And so the one guy said, someone who does not understand Swift should not be making a framework for it. If you don't know how to drive a car, you probably shouldn't take one on the highway. You're going to hurt someone. Ow, right here. Ow. We were working on it for 20 years, but we're brand new to Swift, which is only a year old. All little guys, the one who truly understand Swift, and they're so passionate that they choose to spend their nights and weekends. What, because we only work like an hour a day? I don't know why a company that has no background in Swift products would randomly decide to create a Swift server. Somebody had to. I mean, the only reason I can think of they wanted to take advantage of Swift's boom in popularity or abuse it. It feels like a gimmick. No. Another guy who's in the first few days, who's a leading author, we did an analysis of the most popular speakers in the Swift world. The most popular speaker immediately said, you guys are spamming us, and you are not Swifty. And we were like, what's Swifty? I mean, it's only been around for 2 years, like not even. Like we haven't even crystallized what the language looks like yet, and yet we're not Swifty. I was like, well, what is that? And so I asked, like, what is this? And he was like, well, it's just that you don't use the things that Swift has in it. And I said, well, can you give us an example? And he said, yes, you don't use structs where you should use structs, you use classes. OK, well, we have money. So I took people and put them in and said, go find every possible class you can and change it to a struct. There are 400. We found 2. Anyway, there's another big thing that happened, and that was that another small startup in the States decided they were also going to come up with a Swift framework called IBM. I remember the day this happened, because we're like rocking it, everything's going great, and we're building stuff, we're hiring people to make cool stuff, and then out on the waves it says, IBM has stepped into the ring. And I got to tell you, this is sort of like, I feel like you're the 800-pound gorilla, and you're super happy about that, and King Kong walks in. I'll tell you what I did. I lay down on the ground like this, and I started to cry. Anyway. Needless to say, fast forward a little bit, and we're still all on the same playing ground because we're still all building technology. So we're still fighting IBM. I don't know what fighting. What's interesting is now from an open source, everyone's open source, and everyone's supposed to be. There's flowers being thrown in the air, and it's fun. And really, like we were at a conference about a month ago, and there's all the sort of frameworks were there that have now sort of sprung up. And IBM was talking about the frameworks and how cool they were. And they went from person to person to person and skipped us completely and went on to the next group. So everyone has seen the movie where the guy's like, what is this? What am I? We're like, am I not visible enough? Like, another thing that we screwed up on was we called the project Perfect. Right? Now I want to defend this a little bit because obviously it seems egotistical that you would call a software project perfect. Germans hate us, I will note that. But actually, here's how it would happen is we went, hey, we want to paying homage to FSOSS, which is a LAMP-style project. We wanted to make sure we were in the LAMP stack. And the M's, as you know, represent MySQL, Maria. Of course, the latest one, not really that latest, but same sort of idea, closed source project that turned open source is Mongo. And so we went, OK, we want to start the letter P, obviously. So we're going to start it with P, and we tried to come up with a name that was a bird, starting with the letter P. It's like pheasant, partridge, like all these stupid names. They're all taken. Like, we're at a point in the universe where every dictionary word you can think of is a programming language or a framework by now, right? And the second part is we wanted to have a .org, And so, we're trying to buy a .org or get a .org so we can make this an iconic 1,000-year-old project. And try finding a .org these days. They are not cheap. And one of the only ones that we could find that had started with a P and didn't suck completely was Perfect. So we just kind of adopted it. And we've had more people hate us for the name we chose than you would possibly believe. In fact, we did a survey, and 32% of people hate it. Like, some people have even said, I refuse to use it because of the name, which doesn't seem like a technically sound decision. But that's a reality. What's also, okay, so that's a big mistake. Another huge mistake we made this year. In fact, next week, we're being nominated, and we're in the top 3 right now, for the best brands that came out of Canada this year. The Canadian Association of Marketing Professionals has said this brand is awesome. Scratches his head. But actually, it more came across like Great Aunt Matilda, walks in a room and she's trying to smooch all the developers. Like this sort of attitude that we were trying to come across as this thing. That wasn't the idea. But what we got is this idea that we were suspicious marketing. I'm not sure what suspicious marketing is. Another guy said, but the damage is done anyway because you guys have decided to heavily market something that's not the best it can be. Is anything the best it can be? You just heavily marketed something built quickly in a small time frame by someone who does not have strong Swift background. There's no such thing as a developer with 3 years of Swift experience, except maybe Chris Lattner himself. Right? So nobody has a strong Swift background. Sorry, I'm ranting now. Anyway, I needed to tell somebody, and you guys are forced to listen to me. Another big mistake we made, and this, I'm totally new to this. We're totally new to this. We'd never had an open source project before. And I can remember, we were around at Togmote licenses with Evan and Chris, who are part of FSOSS. And we were like, well, we went to lawyers. And lawyers told us that GPL is the way to go. And we were like, OK. Like, when we did all the selection lists, that made sense. I read every book. I went to chapters about every book they had. I read everything. I'm like, GPL seems like a logical thing. So we GPL'd it. And people were like throwing us out of their boat over GPL. We will never use a project that GPL'd. We can't stand GPL. And I'm like, it doesn't work in this environment, et cetera, et cetera. So we were like, then what do you want it to be? Like, we're just trying to give it away. We're going to make money on helping people in other ways. And basically, there was a group of people we went to. One was Chris. He really has to update his pictures online. And he said that. And the other one was, of course, Bob Young, the founder of Red Hat, who's also slightly connected to the GPL. And we talked to him, and he was like, tell us, what should we do? And he said, if the license is in the way, get it the hell out of the way. Like, make it not be a subject for discussion. So we changed it to Apache, and everyone stopped beating us up on that. Another thing that we had was this idea, and we're still going to that people are still have this attitude that we don't accept contributions. I don't know what we did wrong, but like, why wouldn't we accept contributions? I don't understand. Like, that's why we did it. Like, we wanted to play in the open source world with you guys in your sandbox, and we're not invited to the sandbox. So what we found is, honestly, is people are contributing to all the other projects, and we're sort of working all by ourselves anyway in many cases. That's not completely true. We have a huge group of people. But we made some other mistakes along that. Another example would be when we were like, hey, where should we be having open discussions in the community? And I was like, ooh, let's go everywhere. Let's start Gitter, let's start Slack, let's start IRC, let's start Twitter, let's start every possible place we could have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. That was a stupid idea, by the way, for future reference. Because in fact, what that meant was we had a few people over here, a few people over here, a few people over here, and when somebody asked a question over here, the person who knew the answer was somewhere else. So not actually having one place for everybody to communicate was a huge mistake on our part. And also now we're seen as less popular than some of the other frameworks, as an example, because we don't have as many people. Or in fact, we count up all the people that are actively using it. We're way ahead of everybody else. Just, I think. I actually don't know, because I don't know how many people are still with what, how many people across channel. It's very confusing. That was a big mistake. There's another issue that we had, and that's that we're Canadian. This is a bizarre sort of thing, but people literally came up and said, well, we're not sure how the laws work in Canada and whether your open sourcing will be as open sourcey as us. And we're like, what? Come on. Another issue is the idea that we are a company and that we accepted investment and other things, and we're very public about it. We're like, hey, we got money. It's so fun. This is awesome. And no, that didn't work at all. People were like, no, corporations are evil. You're a corporation, therefore you must be evil. No, we're not evil. We're not trying to screw anybody. And what's funny is all of the other guys, including IBM, are somehow getting away with being a corporation. I'm like, isn't that a corporation too? Kind of think that's a corporation. So anyway, I sort of said, look, we're doing this because we're trying to create a stable place so we can actually build this product and grow this product and rethink this framework, because we really believe in some of these cool new ideas that we've brought forward that we've been hiding under a bushel for so long, and now we've been able to bring them out into the light. Another big mistake. I've now told you my story. But the number of people who said that because I wore a suit, I couldn't be trusted. We as a company have a CEO. That's an inherently bad thing. Therefore, you shouldn't be working with that project over there. And in fact, so our PR team took the most relaxed picture of me, which has to be the worst picture of me. In fact, the PR team came and said, you know what, we'd like you to get into like an ironic t-shirt. We'd like to take pictures of you in an ironic t-shirt. It's like, what? I am not going to dress in an ironic t-shirt because people believe the ideas. So maybe that's another fail, is that whatever got me to where I am wearing a suit, the only guy in a room, has actually limited our ability to move forward as an open source project. A whole bunch of other issues that I would say we've been accused of being anachronistic because we did things like have a .org, because .ios are cool now, not .orgs. We used soft in our name, PerfectlySoft. That was actually because last minute we were supposed to be Perfect Inc., and there turned out to be a Perfect Inc. in Markham. And so we couldn't incorporate that, and it was a big thing. We had to incorporate that day, and it was like, just call it something. We'll inherit soft. That's funny. Go with that. PerfectlySoft. I mean, come on, that's funny, right? Another thing was we positioned ourselves to the LAMP stack, and of course, for the microservice advocates out there, that's an anachronistic idea as well. I was like, well, that was just because there will be people who want to use PHP beside this, so it does make sense to position ourselves there. But that's, of course, we're not hipsters. We have marketing. I own a marketing company. I can't help it. It's like I market. So I mean, one possibility is that actually I get some orange hair and a fleece vest, and then I'll be good to go. Anyway, so that's it. I'm running out of time. I did want to sort of recap in a couple of slides. One is, we took this 20-year-old project with actually decent money coming in and said, that's not what we're here about. We want to go make something amazing. We want to take these ideas and do something cool with it. And jumped into this sort of open source idea, thinking that flowers and babies would sing and everything was going to be great. And in many cases, it is. We've had an amazing experience in some ways, and in other ways, we've gotten the crap kicked out of us, and it's been very uncomfortable, because actually we don't know what we're doing when it comes to managing a community or managing an open source project, even though we may know what we're doing technically. And in fact, the idea that we have no understanding of open source, I've now realized we should have gotten involved in more open source projects first to understand how the communities work and how the politics work maybe before we did it, instead of dragging our community in. Suspiciously good marketing. I think I could change the company motto to suspiciously good marketing. Fleece vests and lumber section. I'm going to go back to my dad's beard thing. I know he looked good in it. And not over communicating. We over communicated. We talked too much. We had some massive mistakes in this process. So I guess my last thing would be, if you are a developer, I'd really appreciate your trying it. I'm marketing here, see? And honestly, if you've ever done anything in the open source world and you're looking to be at the vanguard of the beginning of a project that we do plan on working with for the next 1,000 years, and you want to come join and just help us go the right direction. It doesn't have to be code. It can be code. It can be like guys, stop using words like, we're going to kill you. No, we didn't say that. Help us out on that. I really appreciate it. And last would be, please don't believe that every single person that wears a suit is evil. It's not true. Then people may actually be evil who aren't wearing suits, and they're among you now, hiding. So thank you. Those are my 4 presentations. I really appreciate it. We're out of time, so no questions. Come find me later if you want some.
I think we have like time for like a couple.
Oh, we do? Woo, good.
Yeah, there's probably time for like a couple questions.
Anyone have a question? That was easy. Yes, sir.
How are you doing now? What stage is Swift is your project in now?
So Swift 3 crystallized about a month ago. 2 months ago? Has it been that long? Oh my gosh. So when that happened, the Swift Package Manager was included in that. And as a result, we had a massive architectural shift to handle that. And so the project is still growing like mad. We're still getting 20, 30, 40 GitHub stars a day. We're still getting 200 to 300 downloads a day. So it's still going viral, I would call it. I mean, people are using it as a brand new project under a year old. We've got a lot of people putting contributions in. We still are we still have this really confused now community, and we don't know what we are, and that's we're sort of on the. Sorry?
No, just go ahead.
Yeah, no, we're all over the map on that right now. But honestly, everything's growing, and we've actually had some really interesting things. Like the Chinese development community has picked up on Perfect and is loving it, and they love the name apparently Perfect, as opposed to people from New York who hate the name Perfect. So. No, it's been very interesting. So it's sort of a schizophrenia right now, where every day is like woo Yes, sir.
So I'm wondering to what extent you're involved in the free and open source software sort of outreach communities or those efforts amongst those communities, because the early stories that you were telling seem to be very congruent with the discussions that are around inclusivity in free and open source software.
How do we find those?
Outreachy is one of the efforts, the Geek Feminism Wiki. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there now about this, and it's all about how, this isn't about angry young men in their parents' basement, which sounds like the later part of your story.
Right.
It's about, living a good life, and we can only build good things if we build them together and include everybody.
I'm going to come find you afterwards, if that's okay, and write down a list of places we could go. Because not knowing where to go, like I went to chapters about every book, but it's like,
yes.
that doesn't have any of that in it.
Yeah.
I did go to this really cool conference today, and that's sort of the beginning of the new chapter of the journey, I would say. Thank you. Yes, sir. I have absolutely no idea would be the real answer. So if anyone has any suggestions on how I could do that, we would love to hear them. Join our Slack and actually join the Slack, go do these other things. One of the things we did do is we actually closed or went to some of the channels and said, look, this seems to be the most popular channel. Let's stop having conversations over here. Let's start having conversations here. Yes, sir.
We should probably end.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Thank you. We'll talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much on behalf of FSOSS organizers.
Thank you.